Lightwave 8 first came out with dynamics, one of the things they showed us was how to use dynamics to smash things around. Well, when we finally got our hands on Lightwave 8, things were a little more complicated than we first were led to believe. I have my cow object here, and I've just added a collision object. I'm going to keyframe it so it comes smashing into the cow. And I will use hard body dynamics on the cow. So select my cow object, my dynamics, and hard, and calculate. And what will happen is, instead of smashing into a whole bunch of little pieces, what I have here is it just breaking into two pieces. Now the reason this bit of tail is flying off, we'll pop in the modeler for a second here, we'll be able to see I select just a portion of the tail, go to my detail, and do select connected. What happens is we see that this cow is actually, this tail is actually not, the points are not connected. And that is why when the hard body collision happens, these two pieces break apart. Now I can go in, and I'm just going to do a little copy and pasting here, holding down my mouse key, selecting bits and pieces, I'm going to take these pieces, do a cut, and then a paste. So it's the exact same polygons, however they're not connected. So as I synchronize with layout, then switch back to layout, and let's run that simulation again, and we see all those pieces that I cut and pasted, which are now separate, they're not connected, they're not welded together, are now breaking apart. If I wanted to get really insane with this cow, and who doesn't like an insane cow, I'll select the whole thing as a polygon. With every polygon selected, I'm going to click on Unweld. This means that now every polygon, this is just made, it's like a mosaic cow. So I'll synchronize with layout, switch to layout, so we're back here, hit start. Now this took about 5 minutes to calculate. So you can see what happens because every polygon was unwelded. It had a whole lot of math to do here. All the bits and pieces are going flying. Now this is still hard body. Every polygon is being unwelded, and it probably is not very pleasant for the cow either. However, you can see this is the collision object coming in to the cow object with everything unwelded. So let's switch to something a little bit more practical. We're going to clear the scene. I'm going to add an object. This is the Ford F-150, which comes as a stock object with the Lightwave content. I'm going to add a collision object, and I'm going to size it up. And once again, create some animation. Start over here, and right about 30, we'll move it so it collides with the truck. There's going to be a couple of settings we're going to have to adjust. But let's just start with this. Go to our properties, our truck, and we'll just add the hard body dynamics. So this is nothing fancy so far. Just add a collision object, loaded an object, which obviously has separate bits and pieces to it. Even though it's a single object, we know that this truck was, when this truck was modeled, for instance, the wheels are not necessarily connected to the body. And let's just do a calculate here and see what happens. Sure enough, it breaks into all the little bits and pieces. And as the collision object moves through, it's connecting with all those pieces. Now, this is far from perfect. However, in some cases, this might be what you want. If you have, say, for instance, let's say a spaceship, and it's being hit by a photon torpedo in outer space, and things just go flying all directions, that's fine. And if, say, you want the wheel to break up into 3 different pieces, or the cab, we just saw how we can go into Modeler, select the polygons, and break them into bits and pieces so that when it collides, they will fall apart. And look, there it goes. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm not liking about this. For one thing, the collision seems to be a bit too enthusiastic. Things are flying all over the place. They're flying off. There's no gravity assigned to this. So we got a bit of a problem there. Also, it's going way too far. So let's take care of things one at a time. First thing we're going to do is add gravity. And we could add a gravity using our browser and just select gravity. But I want the gravity specifically for that truck. So I'm going to go into my object properties for the truck, HardFX, under force, and give it a negative, let's do it accurate, 9.8, real world. However, what happens, because we're giving it real world gravity, look at that. It has gravity, so it's falling. Now there's a couple of ways we could deal with this. One is we could add a collision object, which we're going to do in a minute anyway, and have it rest on there, but then it needs to fall into place, and that's actually more work than we might want. Instead, we have this option, and it's still in the Dynamics tab for object properties. It's not under force, it's under collision. We have this option to have things start happening when the collision starts. So start by collision. That's all I'm going to do is just switch that to start by collision, because right now this previously rendered scene is falling out. So let's recalculate that with start by collision activated, and we can see already it is not dropping out of the way like it did previously. It stays in place until the collision happens, and then everything gets knocked all over the place. So I'm going to hit my control key to stop this, since I've already made my point. We can see the truck is in place until the collision happens, then the gravity takes place. So that's one thing out of the way. The other problem is it's falling, and it's falling forever. We don't want that, unless this would be like an airplane, or once again maybe a UFO that got hit by a missile. We want it to stop kind of at the ground plane. Now when I loaded up this truck, normally I would have keyframed it up on the ground plane, just because it's much easier to visualize things. But I purposely had it not be on the ground plane, so this becomes a little bit clearer. I'm going to add another collision object, which defaults to this sphere. I'm going to click on Properties. I could do this in the Object Properties as well. I'm just going to switch this to Plane. And there's our plane. See, our axis, our rotation point is right here, but the plane is up there. That's because the radius level defaults to 1 meter. I'm just going to switch that to 0 because it just makes things clearer. It's not absolutely necessary because I'm going to move this anyway. I want to move it so it is just under the tires. Let's zoom in. If the collision object is already intersecting with the geometry, it gets confused when it's starting to do the math. So I'm going to leave it so I know that's a little bit below. And remember, this collision won't even take effect. It won't even notice that until the bits and pieces start colliding. So let's go to our perspective view once again and hit start, and let's see what happens. Our primary collision object is hitting our truck. Gravity is kicking in after the collision takes place, and we should be seeing the objects not falling any farther than the ground plane. This calculation took a little bit longer. As we can see, it's still flying off pretty enthusiastically. Let's take a look. We can see that nothing falls below the ground plane. So we're well on our way here. So let's tone down the action of our collision object. Now there's two ways we can do this. We can adjust the collision, and we can also adjust the properties of the victim object, the one that's being collided with. Let's start with the collision. Select our collision object, its properties, and there are a number of settings in here. The most important appears to be the bounce and bind power. I'm going to take this down to, say, 5% and do a recalculation as it comes in. And you can see, instead of things flying off crazy, we have a almost snowplow-like action, which is pushing it out of the way. So that's not so bad. Here I've set the brake distance to 2 meters. In theory, that means when something collides after it breaks apart, it will only move about 2 meters. In practice, it doesn't seem to be working exactly as advertised, but it does work sometimes. So what we have here is a scene that is on the CD called Truck Smash. You can load this up and take a look yourself. And we have a fairly nice simulation of a truck getting smashed. We've got some nice bouncing going on, we've got some gravity going on, and it's being pushed out of the way. Now normally you think, I probably want another vehicle to come in here. And that's true. And why don't we do that? Let's load up basically a clone of the first truck, and I'm going to parent it to the collision object so they're just matched up. And just move it so it kind of lines up correctly with how we would expect to see it. And that's looking pretty good. Now I'm not recalculating. Now the truck itself is not really a collision object. I could make the truck a collision object very easily just by going in, selecting the truck, and selecting collision object for the truck. The reason I don't is that the truck is a very complicated geometric object and may not necessarily give me a better calculation, and it will certainly take much, much longer. In this case, we don't need that because look, this is doing a pretty decent job here. In fact, we get the added benefit. We're not seeing this collision object, but the collision object does appear to be affecting it. It kind of gives the illusion that the things are connected together somehow. If I wanted to, I can clone this collision object, make it smaller, put it on the side to get more interaction. But this is working pretty good. So that is using hard bodies with collisions to have it break apart. One quick thing, let's save this as save scene as 2 trucks. Now that truck is breaking apart into lots of little pieces. It doesn't have to. Maybe it's a slower collision. So let's change the way that collision works. We're going to go to our first truck, into the properties of HardFX. Here we have piece mode. Now piece mode means how the collision is calculated. Right now it's at parts. Parts just mean unconnected polygons. So we're going to go to one piece. There are 2 types of piece modes. There's one piece and one piece collision. So basically what it means is with one piece, it's one piece all the time. With one piece parts collision, it means it's one piece until a collision happens. That means if you have some other effect, some other forces acting on your hard body dynamics, it will behave as if it is a single unified piece except for collision. Here we're going to do one piece. I've just run the calculation, and what happens is now when the collision happens, the truck is being treated as a single object. It's still colliding with my initial collision object. Also, the truck is riding on the secondary collision, which is my ground plane. By the way, that ground plane, even though it only looks like it's a meter square, that goes on forever. That's an infinite plane. The truck comes up, bangs it, so it's not flying in a billion pieces like it did previously. Which, although is cool, this is probably more realistic. And something I would do if this was an actual job, I would take my object, my truck object here, and create an endomorph. I would have like a before and after. Once I have my scene fairly well and it's like approved and people like the way it looks, I would go in and use some modeling tools and put some dents and bend it and set up my morph and key it so it happens right at that collision. And I think I'd get a really believable, satisfying crunch by using this as a collision, this as a victim object, and this as a single piece.